Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that, than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at SportsHistoryNetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that. It'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today. Nothing fights the winter blahs better than thinking about springtime and the game of baseball, which is right around the corner. And as we think about that and prepare for the great game, we have an author on that's going to talk about some great baseball history. His name is Alan Swigonski, and he's on to tell us all about his new book in just a moment. Hi, my name's Darren Hayes, and I know you've heard me on the Pigskin Dispatch talking about football history for years. Well, now I'm on a new mission, a quest to find sports history in other sports as well as football by learning through the jerseys and the apparel and the gear that the players wore and the franchises supplied their teams. It's an educational trip, and I'm taking you with me day by day, player by player, uniform by uniform. The Sports Jersey Dispatch.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my friends of sports history. This is Darren Hayes of the Sports Jersey Dispatch podcast. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to all things great in sports history. And we have a great look into that portal today. We're going to go and look at some baseball. It's not that far off. We're having people start reporting to training camps here real soon. So it's always a good time to talk about baseball history. And we're going to be talking to a gentleman right here in my backyard of northwestern Pennsylvania that has wrote a couple great books on some local baseball that has some national waves to it as well. His name is Alan Swigonski. And Alan, welcome to the Pig Pen.
Thanks, Darren. I appreciate it.
Alan, you have some great books out there of, on some local Erie baseball, and Erie has really had a lot of great baseball history, which we'll get into in just a moment here. But I guess, first of all, let's tell the audience what the name of your book is, and maybe give an opportunity where they can look it up to buy it.
Absolutely. There's actually two of them now. I just released my second. The first book came out in 2020, right before Christmas of 2020, and it was called Erie Baseball and Softball 360, Volume 1. So I was being optimistic back then. And then just last month, I released Volume 2, Erie Baseball and Softball 360, Volume 2. They're both available at Werner Books in Erie and Liberty Plaza. And that's the only way that people can get it. Although, if you're interested in seeing a copy and you're not in Erie, you can always give them a call. If I can leave you the phone number, that way, if people are interested, they can call, and Werner's mails them.
And I'll put this phone number in our show notes also. So go ahead.
Thanks. Area code 814-864-1565.
814-864-1565 for Warner Books to get a copy of Alan's book. Now, the 360 in the name of both your books is kind of an interesting twist. I take it that's going to be a full circle?
Yeah, absolutely. It suggests that we're approaching the topic from all points of view. And I get all those points of view from supplementing my research and my personal stories with interviewing people. And it's their stories that provide that 360 perspective, different way of looking at baseball and softball in Erie.
Yeah, most definitely. Now, I have been a part of both of those myself. I'm a lifelong resident of Erie County, and, a little bit more of a softball player than a baseball player. Not very good, but had a heck of a...
me neither.
But boy, we had a lot of softball back, probably 30 years ago, and baseball happening around the city.
If you can picture the old ballpark at 11th and Hess, fans would fill the stands and line 3 or 4 deep across the outfield fences just to watch their favorite fast-pitch softball players. And the tournaments attracted talent from all around the world, not just the country.
Yeah, what was it? It was it was a Memorial Day tournament they had.
Yeah,
it was the big one.
The Carpet Town tournament, and it was hosted by my a friend that I found through this project, Bruce Bauman. We got to be very good friends until we lost Bruce a short time ago, last year. But he graces both Volume 1 and Volume 2, probably the best storyteller that I've come across during the project, and a dear friend that was instrumental in sustaining fast-pitch softball and sponsoring other teams and leagues, and even ran the Erie Codgers League that's still thriving, of players that are 50 years and older. So that's another contribution from Bruce, and those games are still played at that field at 11th and Hess. So some of the guys that played at the height of their careers, the fast pitch tournaments, are still gracing the field in their 70s and 80s, a couple in their 90s.
Wow, that is truly amazing. Well, before we get too much into the history in the book, why don't we learn a little bit about you? You know, what drove you to your love of baseball and softball?
Yeah, my dad and my brothers played, probably from my dad. He was a very talented baseball player. He was actually a very powerful hitter and good first baseman. He had professional prospects until World War II came across. He ended up at Iwo Jima instead of minor league ball. So that was it. But his hitting talent did not pass down to me. My brothers were good hitters, Leo and Larry. And I write about them in the book too. Some fun stories from growing up. I pitched. I was good enough to play industrial ball and pitch, so I loved it. But I couldn't hit the ball to save my life.
Well, that's a story of many of us. You know, that's the downfall. That's why we're not getting paid the big bucks playing, you know, in stadiums around the country and in Major League Baseball, right?
But having grown up in the Lower East Side, I was right by that ball field at 11th and Hess, so that's where we played sandlot ball and had so much fun. Through the years, I played as much softball as I could while I was working, but eventually that gave way to having to travel for my work, and I kind of got out of the game a little bit. I was always, though, a big fan of baseball. The local minor league team, the Erie Sailors, back in the 60s, and the Seawolves more currently. I was involved with Team Erie back in the 90s, the group that actually spearheaded the effort to get the new ballpark built, working with Jerry Utt and some other leaders in Erie that pulled together and actually started the project to try to save baseball by upgrading the old Ainsworth Field, a facility that's over 100 years old in Erie's west side, but having understood quickly that the minor league standards wouldn't be sustainable at Ainsworth, we switched gears and undertook a 5-year effort to get what became Jerry Utt Park. Now it's UPMC Park, built, and it's been successful ever since with AA Baseball as an affiliate of the Tigers.
Well, I can personally, as an Erie, thank you and your cohorts for the efforts. I grew up right near Ainsworth Field.
Really?
Yeah, I was on 21st and Cranberries where I lived growing up. So
we're going to have to talk, Darren. We're going to have to talk. My next project, I'll tease it right now. Volume 3 is very much Ainsworth centric. I'll be focusing on the history. I do touch on it quite a bit in Volume 1 and Volume 2. Some stories you would recognize, but Volume 3 would dive into it a little deeper, going back to the history of the field and bringing it up to current day where it's used for scholastic ball and the Glenwood League. The Glenwood League being the longest running amateur baseball in the world, going on 100 years plus. So still some very good ball being played on a very old field that needs some love. So part of what I'm trying to do is remind people we have a gem of a field there on the west side that's decaying, needs some love, and I'm encouraging Erie to do something about it. So that's a big part of the future.
Yeah. Well, let me just paint a picture to folks what what you just described, going from Ainsworth Field in minor league ball to going to UPMC, park that we have now, in all its renovations. But Ainsworth, like you said, it's over 100 years old, and it's a very traditional ballpark, but all cement in the grandstands. And I can just remember climbing those giant cement stairs. I guess there was a staircase too, but there was sort of, you were sitting on the cement a lot of the time, I know.
Sure.
And we went through, like you said, in the 60s, we had some minor league teams called the Sailors, and then they came back, I believe in the late 70s, early 80s, and they came back as the Sailors. They played some independent ball, and then we got a taste of single A baseball with the Cardinals organization. We had the Erie Cardinals, and they played at Ainsworth. And it's hard to believe that back, 40 some years ago, they were playing minor league ball at Ainsworth, and they really had it fixed up really pretty nice for the Cardinals to play there. And then, you and your cohorts and, everybody got the ball rolling and got what was first called Jerry Witt Park, who was instrumental, as you mentioned earlier, in helping to get this stadium built. Down in our old downtown shopping district, I believe is where the Sears store used to be, is the location, if I'm not mistaken. Right. It was right in there somewhere. And right next to our civic center that was built probably in the early 80s, I think was when that opened. And, it's really a fantastic ballpark. Now the UPMC is what it's called now. And they've done some renovations recently. It's just tremendous for a small town, and having, minor league baseball. It's an excellent venue to watch. But
yeah, they did it right.
But like you say, Ainsworth has just got that something special about it, because it's so old, and it's still so storied, and has so many memories for folks like you and I that have been around it for generations. So maybe if you could, I know you're going to talk about it in your next book, but maybe tell us some of your memories of Ainsworth.
Oh, wonderful memories of Ainsworth Field. It was the first real ballpark that I saw. And I remember seeing the first game when Erie would have been a member of the Tigers organization back in the early 60s, with Dick McAuliffe and Jake Wood and players like that were Buck Rogers, that fielded a very competitive team. And I remember some of those teams coming through. It was pro baseball at its finest. So I was just really taken by the whole aura of it, the professionalism on the field, all the people in the stands, the sights, the smells, the whole thing. I just drank it all in. I loved it instantly. By the time my dad took us to our first major league game in Cleveland, I thought I died and went to baseball heaven. But Ainsworth was my first introduction. I'll never forget it. And I went back there to games throughout their different editions of the team, when they were affiliates of the Orioles and Cardinals. And the first rendition of the Miami Marlins was a single A team in Erie. That was the Erie Sailors. John Lynch, the Hall of Fame football player and GM of the 49ers, pitched that first game. So I have a vivid memory of that. So a lot of great memories. The people I attended with, that I worked with, are my friends and my family, and as many games as I could get to. So it's hard to go back. I went to a game recently as part of Volume 2. I was interviewing different folks affiliated with the Glenwood League, and I was saddened to see that the field's in bad shape. The grandstand is in bad shape.
Well, why don't we shift gears a little bit, and let's talk about, you've mentioned a couple of the gentlemen that have played ball here in Erie, either going through the minor leagues or maybe born and raised here. Why don't we talk about some of those individuals that some of the bigger names that people might recognize that played baseball either amateur or professional here in Erie.
Yeah, Justin Verlander is a future Hall of Famer, a Cy Young Award winner, a World Series hero. He played briefly in Erie as a member of the Tigers in his first year. Todd Zeal and Todd Worrell were members of the Erie Cardinals teams that graced the field. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Jim Merritt was part of the Twins playoff team in the 60s, and then the Reds dynasty in the early 70s. Going back even further, there's so many players that oh my gosh, where do I begin? Dean Stone with the Red Sox and the White Sox was a unique player that I talk about in Volume 1 that actually won an all-star game without recording it out. Base runner was picked off, and he was able to be the winning pitcher without actually getting anybody out, which is kind of unique.
Yeah, that is neat.
Lance Johnson is a player that I admired as part of the Erie Seawolves. There's some guys, there were over 20 players that premiered in Major League Ball last year alone that started out in Erie, and some of them took a long and winding road. Wynton Bernard took 11 or 12 years in the minors before his call-up, and he finally made it to the major leagues after the very lengthy period of time bouncing around different systems. So he finally got a chance and did very well. He's now with the Toronto organization, so it'll be interesting to see him develop. Players like that I love as much as the stars. Seeing guys grind it out in the minors and then work their way up to the major leagues is a real thrill. Kirby Farrell is another player that started in Erie and was a manager of the Indians, now the Guardians, but he was the tribe manager for quite a while, another big name. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I have a baseball card collection, and the collection is of all guys that had baseball cards that played in Erie, and there's hundreds of them. Ted Yolander and Frank Quillisi from the old Twins. Pat Kelly played in Erie as a member of the Twins and eventually starred for the White Sox, Indians, and Orioles. His brother was Leroy Kelly, the Hall of Fame running back for the Browns. Pete Rose Jr. played on the Erie Orioles. That's Pete's son. The Hall of Famer's boy was much like its father in terms of his spunk and his personality. Didn't do too well, although he did make it to the majors for a brief time with the Reds. So that was kind of neat watching him play. There's so many.
I can remember back in the 80s, we had a gentleman by the name of Tom Lawless that came through the Erie ranks and did pretty well for himself.
Yeah, St. Vincent High School and the Glenwood League, and eventually a World Series hero for the Cardinals with a bat flip after a homer that is in baseball history. Very good. Yeah, it's great to see some of these folks pass through the ranks. There's a couple of Erie guys. Chris Valamon pitched for Mercyhurst. He's with the Orioles right now in their spring training camp this week. Probably today, reporting for his first day in that organization. John Costello pitched for Mercyhurst and then for the Erie Cardinals in the 70s. The current commissioner, Trish, of the Glenwood League, Trish DeSanti Bame, her family's a big baseball family. Her brother actually was part of the battery at Mercyhurst. He was the catcher for Costello. So she has a legacy to fulfill there as commissioner. Wow. And she's also a reason for my optimism that there's better days ahead. There's some great people involved with the Glenwood League that I've gotten to know through the books. And that gives me reason for optimism. It also gives me motivation knowing what they've invested in the past. Sam Jethro is one of the most famous Erie guys. He played in the Negro Leagues. He eventually, he was the age of 30 plus before he got a chance to play for the Milwaukee Braves. And he ended up to be Rookie of the Year, the fastest player in in Major League Baseball, even at that age. And I remember one of my very first Glenwood League games that I saw as a youngster was him pitching on a team that he managed. So that was a thrill for me to watch somebody like Sam Jethro. Part of the allure of Ainsworth Field and the history is what it has to do, not just with the Glenwood League and the minor league ball, but also the Negro Leagues. Erie had a black team that was called the Erie Pontiacs, and they played against the Negro Leagues and barnstorming teams. And we're very, very proud of that history. And I try to highlight that in my books as well. Great players like Sam Jethro and Trueheart Pietros, and Willie Grace was a great, great player. A lot of guys came over from the Cleveland Buckeyes in the Negro Leagues to play in Erie near the end of their career. And that left such a mark that it's important to remember that. If you look at the grandstand at Ainsworth Field today, you'll see two portraits up near the press box. One is Sam Jethro and the other is Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth being one of the more famous stories I talk about in Volume 1, whereas a member of his own barnstorming team passed through Erie along with Lou Gehrig and some other all-stars, and is famous for hitting a homer so far traveled over the adjacent Roosevelt School. I actually found the original article from that, so I know it happened. They say it's legend, but I found the article digging in.
He hit it over the school, you said?
Over the school.
Wow. And
well,
folks,
at least onto the roof.
And folks, this school was, I mean, it took the whole outfield. You know, it was from left field to right field all the way across, and probably 3 or 4 stories high.
4 stories tall.
4 stories. And all red brick. And I've seen some people hit the school before, which is quite a poke.
Yes.
Back there with it. But to hit it on the roof, even that is an amazing shot. And I guess the salt and the swing is the only one that could probably do that. Huh?
He really nailed it. The other interesting thing about Ainsworth, it saw another Erie guy that is of some renown that I talk about in Volume 1 is Louis Bierbauer, who's responsible for how the Pittsburgh Pirates got their name. The Pirates are called Pirates because they stole Bierbauer from the Philadelphia team way back in the 20s. It might have been sooner than that. I'm sorry. But anyway, as the story goes, the owner of the Pittsburgh franchise traveled to Erie, actually negotiated his way across frozen Lake Erie to visit Bierbauer as his residence on Presque Isle, and recruited him to come to Pittsburgh. And in an antagonistic way, the folks in Philadelphia then labeled that team as the Pirates, and the fans kind of took to it, so it stuck. So Erie has a role in the naming of the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Yeah, I've heard that story before. It's very, very interesting, especially when they said he walked across the lake, and people are imagining him walking across Lake Erie, where we have a portion of Lake Erie here on our peninsula. We have the Presque Isle Bay, and like you said, it's probably what he walked across. I don't think you can walk across it this year; it's a little bit too warm for it. But
the ice wouldn't have been frozen over this year; it would have been too dangerous. But that happened.
But can you imagine if you lived out on Presque Isle, which I assume had to be a pretty remote location for people to live on even back in that day, and in the middle of winter with everything froze up, and all of a sudden you hear a knock at your door?
Yeah.
Had to be...
you made it all the way out here. I'm convinced I'll play for you.
Right. Amazing story. That's a good one. Okay, you talked about how Babe Ruth and Gehrig on a barnstorming tour came through and played a ball game here in exhibition. Was there any other instances of some major league talent or major league teams playing some exhibition games here in Erie?
Yeah, Napalajaway prior from the Ruth era brought a barnstorming team through. I think that was back before Ainsworth Field, which was originally called Athletic Field. There was a ball field on Green Garden, and that was called Perry Field, so I believe it was there. Honus Wagner and Dizzy Dean were recruited to come to Erie by Mike Canavino, who hosted them. So I was able to find in the archives, Volume 2. I'm happy to show a photo of the three of them at Ainsworth Field: Honus Wagner, Dizzy Dean, with Mike Canavino, an Erie favorite, who was a big, not just a politician in Erie, but a very big promoter in boxing and baseball and sports and of Erie. So that was a cool find, and it's nice to remember some of those guys as well, having passed through. There's some real talent that has played on that ball field.
No, it wasn't the old Glenwood Field. Wasn't that called Canavino Field before they redid 38th Street?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have fond memories of that. That was kind of I was just telling one of my children who, they've only seen West 38th Street in the condition it is now. They never saw how it used to go sort of around the field, and it was kind of a neat little thing. But I guess it's improved. But losing a ball field was a horrible to have that happen.
Yeah.
But
it was sad to see it go. It was nice to see another ball field that the Erie Pontiacs played on, and Glenwood League, and I believe some American Legion ball, I'm not sure, was on the West Bayfront field, and now it's called Pontiac Field, where they've done some renovations on the lower west side, and so it's nice to see that being used. So there's history sprinkled all throughout the city. But Erie's a real baseball town, that's for sure. Softball as well. Even though the City Rec League that I had touched on earlier is no longer viable, I am pleased to see that some really good softball is being played by the ladies and women of the area. That's really grown. I'm very happy in both volumes to write about some of the star players and just some of the family connections that color the history and the current environment with softball. It wasn't just the guys, the girls. I even found some clippings about the Erie Skippers, which was an all-women's softball team back in the 40s. And it turns out that one of my former teammates in the Industrial League softball, Andy Kravonik, his dad, Andy, was one of the best hitters in the Glenwood League locally, and a member of the Erie Sailors for a time. His wife, Audrey Ellis, was one of the star players of the Erie Skippers. And that's how she met her future husband. That's how we got Andy Jr. Her uniform with the name Erie emblazoned across the back, along with her old glove from back in that era, are what grace the cover of Volume 1.
Ah, no kidding. Wow. That's quite a ball-playing family there. A lot of good ball-playing blood in that stock there.
That's just a theme throughout the book, is a lot of family history. That's a constant theme through both books, some of those connections. Paul Yocklin Jr. is now a friend of mine, and coaches Coach Mercyhurst High School. His dad, also a very fine coach and a talented musician. Paul Yocklin was the singer in the Younger Brothers, the popular band that I write in Volume 1. I actually have a photo in Volume 1 of Paul with his band along with the Beatles as they're hamming it up at the Peppermint Lounge in New York City, as the Beatles, during their very first stop in the States in '64, were in New York City to appear on TV for the first time. They stopped to see Paul Yocklin and his band. So that's an Erie guy.
Yeah, I had the great pleasure of meeting both Paul Yocklins. My youngest daughter and Paul Jr.'s daughter went to school together. So we got to go over there for like family birthdays and things like that. And I got to talk to Paul Sr. quite a bit too about his band playing days, because I was familiar with the Younger Brothers, and he tells some great stories. He did.
What a storyteller! What a great man!
Yeah. It was a great loss when we lost him a couple years ago. But what an entertainer, that's for sure.
But I had a chance to meet him, and I was thrilled to be able to do that. We lost him much too early, but at least I had a chance to talk to him. It was wonderful to be able to do that. I had a chance to meet some other people that I had admired growing up. I sought out some former umpires, Carl Carlotti and Pete Leitner, who the twin umpires John and Jerry DeLuca, AP and UPI, who are working on their own book about Erie baseball, which will be called View from Home. So you can look for that soon. What a book!
I'm very familiar with a lot of those gentlemen you just talked about, because I was I was a football official for many years with both of the DeLuca brothers, and I was a softball umpire for probably about 4 or 5 years. I worked with Mr. Carlotti quite a bit, and Bob Finney and some of those legends of the umpiring world too. So we had a lot from those guys.
Yeah. Walter Litz was my favorite softball player growing up, and I had a chance to meet him. John Fetzner and Mike Fetzner and Pat were also favorites of mine that I've gotten to know in the process. But meeting Walt Litz was a thrill. I had a chance to sit down with him and have lunch and just reminisce. I remember him as a teammate of my dad's playing in Northeast in an industrial league game, and watching in awe as he laid down the bunt on the third baseline and ended up on second base before anybody knew what hit him. He had simply never stopped at first base, realizing that by the time the middle infielders realized what he was doing, they couldn't beat him to the bag. So I was in awe, and I love watching him ever since then. Then I found out later that he had played in Codger ball with my brother Larry, and it was so nice to be able to sit down with him and reminisce. And what a role model.
Yeah, you know what I always found amazing, back growing up and back when I was a young adult, is just in men's softball, how many different variations of leagues that we had here. We had the fast pitch, we had modified, we had 2 or 3 different brands of slow pitch baseball or softball, including the mountain ball, the big mush ball, which was an interesting thing. But just
ball, there was church leagues and social service leagues and the women's city rec. You bet. It was. I touch on as many of those as I can, and I really had a lot of fun doing that and meeting some folks that played softball. Some I played against when I got into City Rec, I was the third pitcher on a 2-man staff, which means I never saw the mound. Industrial ball I actually got to play, so I had fun. And some of the guys I played against, I was able to look up some. And I had worked at GTE and played with some very good softball players just in the industrial league with them, John Fetzner and Mike Peterson, Chet Donikowski, Randy Kolish, some very, very good softball players that were much better than I was, but I had so much fun.
All right. Well, we talked a lot about the history of baseball, softball in Erie. Let's talk a little bit about the future. You talked a little bit, want to get some renovations done to Ainsworth Field to have some of the amateur players have a better place to play ball. Where do you see baseball and softball going in the future in your area?
Well, what I'm seeing is more attention throughout the region. I try to emphasize what's going on in the county of Erie and the region, not just the city. And I found that there's been so much put into maintaining the fields and getting lights installed. Volume 1, I talk about the field at Northwestern that Johnny Light was responsible for. And those type of efforts, as I learned about it, watching Union City, the girls softball team have such success the past few years. I touch on that in volume 2. So what I'm seeing is a growth in the girls game and in women's softball. There's more facilities available to them. Erie being a cold weather winter, it's a disadvantage over warm weather cities, but people like Dennis Brandell have opened up spots in a warehouse at his Brandell Home Services. He has carved out space in his warehouse so teams can practice there. He's done that for years. And other facilities are actually growing. And that's really gratifying that the kids are being encouraged from T-ball to the travel teams. I touch on that in volume 2. My goodness, the dedication and the coaching that's available now is actually thriving, in my opinion. So pro baseball is doing well. We've got UPMC Park taken care of for the long term, and the Seals are under a 10-year agreement with the Tigers. We're good. Ainsworth Field, I can only hope that it's simply something I would like to do. Those are all encouraging signs. I don't see sandlot ball. It breaks my heart going by the old ball fields that I played on, and they're empty. It's killing me. I want to see more programs, especially for inner city youths, with some outreach done. I know the Police Athletic League does a lot of things with sports, and I'm hopeful they'll do more with baseball and softball. Perhaps that's something that we can get involved in the future. I would definitely like to support them. The Boys and Girls Club does a lot, and they're always interested in new things. So I'm hopeful for the future that these are resources for our kids, and it can grow the sandlot aspects. There is stuff being done. Some of the leagues, like in Harbor Creek, where they have T-ball and different age groups of instruction, is outstanding, and it doesn't always get a lot of publicity. Boys baseball is gone, but Little League baseball is not. Boys baseball was a local Erie thing that thrived for many years and developed many great players and built better boys, as their motto said. There's stories about some of the players and coaches and leaders from that era. The little leagues are different, but still there, and I'm still very hopeful, especially on the softball side. The City Rec softball is gone, but on the girls and ladies side is just absolutely thriving and growing, and these girls are good. If you ever watch one of their games, you see how talented and dedicated they are. So I like watching them play as well. The Glenwood League is going strong. They're doing better than they have in a long time, and I really appreciate the effort of people like Trish, people like John Fetty, who sponsors Tesco, Mr. Brandell, some of the other folks that have kept that league going to where, if we can get that field fixed up a little bit for them, would be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Alan, let's take the opportunity again to tell the name of your book, and again, how people can get a hold of the copy of the book.
Yes, it's Erie Baseball and Softball 360, Volume 1 and Volume 2. And they can be obtained through Werner Books, WERNER Books, in Liberty Plaza in Erie. Their phone number is 814-864-1565. Kyle Sherman and his team there are very accommodating. He took over recently for Gail Werner, who retired, and handed it over to him. Gail was very supportive as I was learning the ropes. I got some good coaching from people like Chuck Pora and Danny Braybender along the way. I was anxious to see what worked for them, and they were very generous with their time. Hey, do you have time for another quick Ainsworth story?
Sure, absolutely.
One of my favorites that I talk about in Volume 1 has to do with Bill Murray, the actor-comedian. He actually, for a time, was part owner of the Erie Sailors, and
really
made an appearance, a cameo ad during one of the games. He ended up hanging out with Mike Gallagher, the local photographer and sports announcer and editor. He very talented guy. Mike was there to photograph and document the occasion, and ended up hanging out with him afterwards. And that's in Volume 1 where I tell that story. Bill Murray was just very, very much involved with the fans, spent all kind of time with the fans on the field and in the stands before and during and after the game. Very gracious, very approachable. The people that were there just regaled me with such joy about that event. It was worth documenting. And Mike Gallagher was gracious enough to share with me an autographed Sailors jersey that Bill Murray signed for him, and still holds on to this day. It's a nice piece of Erie memorabilia, a nice piece of Ainsworth history. And again, it just shows you some of the colorful aspects of it. I'd be negligent if I didn't mention the fine work that Pat Cuneo did as my editor. Patrick was a friend going back. Kevin, his brother, was not just the sports writer and editor for the Erie paper. He was a former classmate of mine at prep. And I got to know Patrick as well, and your brother Jimmy too. Patrick, very talented, very talented. He's at the Jefferson Educational Society now doing some fine work. But he edited both of the books for me and made my writing look professional. That would not have happened without him.
Hey, it's always those folks that they're doing the dirty work to make us look a lot better, huh, when you have those editors. So, well, Alan Swigonski, I thank you very much for sharing your favorite pastime and some local history here in Erie, and letting the rest of the world enjoy our little touch of heaven that we have here on the ball fields of Erie. And appreciate you writing these books and preserving the baseball and softball history. And sir, appreciate your time for sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Darren.
Sorry, but my pitching coach just called timeout and he's coming out to the mound. I think I'm going to get yanked for a reliever. We'll see you back tomorrow for some more great sports history on Sports Jersey Dispatch Podcast. We invite you to check out our websites, jerseydispatch.com and pigskindispatch.com. Not only see the daily sports history, but to experience the preservation of great events and people that play the games. Find us on Pigskin Dispatch. It's also on social media outlets of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all your daily sports history. Pigskin Dispatch is happy to be associated with the Sports History Network, the sports headquarters of yesteryear, found at sportshistorynetwork.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, aka the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.